Welcome to this episode of the Harpreet Singh Show. I'm your host Harpreet Singh from Surrey, British Columbia, Canada. In today's program, as we are paying homage to our soldiers, our veterans, today we'll be talking to Steve Puriwal, who is the writer, producer and director of a short film which he's making called Promises. And he's going to highlight the contribution of the South Asian and especially the Sikh soldiers in the world wars, which is unknown to many people. So let's welcome Steve and continue with the discussion as to what is the contribution, and especially on Remembrance Day, why there is a need to highlight the activities, the events which led to the world wars, and how the contribution of the Sikh soldiers and the South Asian soldiers is really commendable. Steve, welcome to the program.
Harpreet, thank you for having me on.
Thank you. So Steve, of course, it's been many years that you have been highlighting the contribution of the South Asian soldiers through exhibitions, going around and speaking and letting the public know. So today, as we are paying homage on Remembrance Day, please take us on this journey to our viewers all over the world as to what is the contribution of the South Asian soldiers in these world wars.
Well, the contribution is immense. There's nothing short of changing world history. In the First World War, many people thought the conflict would be over within the first 3 months, i.e. that Germany would win the war by Christmas because it was far stronger in terms of its firepower. Its military was stronger. It had more men than Britain. If not for the intervention of the Lahore division, it may well have been over by Christmas 1914. So you cannot underplay the role of the Punjabi army, the Lahore division, arriving in the nick of time, as they say, in September 1914. And in the Second World War, the sheer size of the Indian army, of which, again, the backbone was Punjabi, meant that the Nazi forces, the Japanese forces, were spread thin. So 2.5 million men were fielded by India in the Second World War. It was, in fact, the largest volunteer army in history. So the contributions are immense in terms of the actions that they took in the First World War. They prevented Germany from occupying the last port that was available, the port of Calais on the French northern seaboard. If they had done that, if Germany had taken possession of that, then the British Expeditionary Force wouldn't have been able to land in Europe, nor would have the Canadian Expeditionary Force. So essentially, what we know to be Canadian history, the writing of the poem In Flanders Fields, the battles of Vimy, none of those would have taken place. In the Second World War, the very first victory, land victory of the British Empire for the British, the first British land victory was delivered by Indian forces in North Africa. So there's no underplaying these roles.
Absolutely, you very rightly said there's no underplaying of these roles. But what we have seen is that they have not been highlighted in a way they should have been. And you get the kudos and you get, I would say, the commendation that you initiated this process, especially in Canada. So can you just take us a little back into your journey as to what prompted you to think that this needs to be highlighted, and you started doing all this on your own? And of course, now things are different. But I remember 4 or 5 years back when you started off, it was a different journey.
Absolutely, Harpreet. I think my journey begins going way back. Growing up in England, I was born and raised. I'm a born and raised Londoner. We were surrounded by different history, British history, perhaps a closer connection to India. But one of the things that I noticed growing up was, we would go to the Gurdwaras and we would see all the pictures adorning the walls of these phenomenal warriors, the sacrifice that we've all seen in the Gurdwaras. But then we never saw those being reflected in the war films of the time. So whether it was Hollywood or Pinewood, creating war films, there's to my mind as a youngster growing up, I can't remember seeing a turbaned soldier in a role, in a heroic role. Now, that was decades ago. Even in 2017, A couple of years ago, Christopher Nolan spent $150 million on creating Dunkirk. And again, we didn't see anything in terms of turban soldiers in this massive, epic World War II film. So this has been consistent in Western cinema. And most recently with 1917 from Sam Mendes, although I commend him for putting turban soldiers in, they almost seem to be an afterthought and were not integral to the story and were nearly set decoration. So the Sikh soldiers, the Punjabi soldiers, whom we know to be unparalleled in history, to be warriors, they just never were reflected. So the question that I asked very early on was, did we ever play a part in these world wars? Were we there? And if we were there, what were we doing? And being brought up, living in England, many of these questions could be answered. The British Library is rich with resources and so forth, and there are antique shops around every corner. So we were able in England to procure artifacts that would prove that we indeed played a major role in these battles. So the journey, as you say, actually began back in England as a child. And then what happened here in Canada, as I raised my own family here in Surrey, BC, I saw the books that were being brought home from school, and I felt that, again, there was no mention. I never saw a picture of turban soldiers in these textbooks. And these textbooks are something that are used, from grade 5 onwards, especially with regard to the poem In Flanders Fields. They're illustrated, and there's never a picture of a turban soldier in there. And that slowly, it just nagged me at it was always nagging me over the years. But when 2014 came, it was the 100-year mark, and I just felt that if we didn't correct our own history at the 100-year mark, I think we were going to lose it forever. And I took it on my shoulders then to not just teach my own children, but to try and teach the children in the Surrey school system. So we set up an exhibition, we established ourselves in local schools, and then following that, 2014 to 2018 period of doing multiple, we did nearly 60 events across the province, and we ended up even in Ottawa. I published a book last year to memorialize all that information as a legacy piece for the exhibit. And this year, what we have is it's the 75th anniversary of the Second World War, and the end of the Second World War. And I felt compelled again now to adapt the story in the book and create a short film, because films are the means by which many Steve, people learn their history.
Absolutely. This short film which we are creating is going to be, again, an exemplary piece as the work which has been done before. It's time for a break. Let's go for a break. We'll be back and we'll learn more from you, especially about this film called Promises. And also we'll learn more from you. We would like to learn some more statistics, if you could share with our viewers, as to how many Sikhs, how many South Asian soldiers fought valiantly, and a lot of them died also. So we'll talk all about this after this short break. ਵੈਨਕਾਸਾ ਟਾਈਲ ਅਤੇ ਸਟੋਨ ਸ਼ੋਰੂਮ ਇੱਕ ਐਸੀ ਥਾਂ ਹੈ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਹੋਲਸੇਲ ਕੀਮਤਾਂ ਤੇ ਹਰ ਕਿਸਮ ਦੀਆਂ ਟਾਈਲਸ, ਸਟੋਨ, ਮਾਰਬਲ, ਬੈਕਸਪਲੈਸ਼, ਮੋਜ਼ੇਕ ਆਦਿ ਵਾਜਬ ਕੀਮਤਾਂ ਤੇ ਮਿਲ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ। ਇਟਾਲੀਅਨ, ਸਪੈਨਿਸ਼, ਚਾਈਨੀਜ਼ ਪੋਰਸਲਨ ਜਾਂ ਸਿਰੈਮਿਕ ਟਾਈਲਸ ਜਾਂ ਮਾਰਬਲ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਆਰਡਰ ਤੇ ਜਾਂ ਕਲੀਅਰੈਂਸ ਤੇ ਲੈ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ। ਮਾਲਕ ਡਾਇਰੈਕਟ ਟਾਈਲਸ ਇੰਪੋਰਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਨ, ਜਿਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਵਧੀਆ ਕੁਆਲਿਟੀ ਦਾ ਸਮਾਨ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰ ਦਾ ਸ਼ਿੰਗਾਰ ਬਣਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ। ਅੱਜ ਹੀ ਵਿਜ਼ਿਟ ਕਰੋ 1304 84 ਐਵਨਿਊ ਸਰੀ। ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਹਿੰਦੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਕਾਲ ਕਰੋ 604 330 7363 604 330 7363।
ਕੁਦਰਤ ਦੇ ਸੌਮਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਵਰਤੋਂ ਆਯੁਰਵੇਦਾ ਰਾਹੀਂ 5000 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਬਣਾਏ ਗਏ ਹੈਲਥ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਅਪਰੂਵਡ 100% ਸ਼ੁੱਧ ਆਯੁਰਵੈਦਿਕ ਡਾਇਟਰੀ ਸਪਲੀਮੈਂਟਸ ਦਾ ਲਾਭ ਲੈ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ। ਸਟ੍ਰੈਸ, ਐਂਗਜ਼ਾਇਟੀ, ਇਨਸੋਮਨੀਆ, ਬਲੱਡ ਸ਼ੂਗਰ, ਕਿਡਨੀ, ਬਲੈਡਰ, ਹਾਜ਼ਮਾ, ਆਈਸਾਈਟ ਜਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਕਿਸਮ ਦੀ ਬਿਮਾਰੀ ਦਾ ਆਰਗੈਨਿਕ ਇਲਾਜ, ਜੋੜਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਦਰਦਾਂ ਤੇ ਸਰੀਰਕ ਮਸਾਜ ਲਈ ਕਈ ਕਿਸਮ ਦੇ ਆਯੁਰਵੈਦਿਕ ਤੇਲ ਵੀ ਉਪਲਬਧ ਹਨ। ਹੋਲਸੇਲ ਕੀਮਤਾਂ ਲਈ ਕਾਲ 604 628 2003।
ਕੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਰੀ, ਡੈਲਟਾ, ਰਿਚਮੰਡ, ਐਬਸਫੋਰਡ ਜਾਂ ਵੈਂਕੂਵਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਵਾਂ ਘਰ ਬਣਾਉਣ ਬਾਰੇ ਸੋਚ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਪੁਰਾਣੇ ਘਰ ਨੂੰ ਰੈਨੋਵੇਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ? ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਇੱਕ ਤਜਰਬੇਕਾਰ ਬਿਲਡਰ, ਇੱਕ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟਿਵ ਇੰਟੀਰੀਅਰ ਡਿਜ਼ਾਈਨਰ ਦੀ, ਜੋ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸਹੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਗਾਈਡ ਕਰ ਸਕਣ ਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਸੁਪਨੇ ਦੇ ਘਰ ਨੂੰ ਉਸਾਰ ਸਕਣ। ਅੱਜ ਹੀ ਕਾਲ ਕਰੋ ਹਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਜਾਂ ਸੰਦੀਪ 604 825 9295 ਉੱਤੇ। ਭਾਰਤ ਪੈਸੇ ਭੇਜਣੇ ਹੋਣ ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਮੰਗਵਾਉਣੇ ਹੋਣ ਤੇ ਯਾਦ ਰੱਖੋ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਫੋਰੈਕਸ ਨੂੰ ਤਸੱਲੀਬਖਸ਼ ਸੇਵਾਵਾਂ ਅਤੇ ਵਧੀਆ ਰੇਟ ਦੇਣ ਦੀ ਇਹ ਗਾਰੰਟੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਨ। ਅੱਜ ਹੀ ਕਾਲ ਕਰੋ 6043491313 ਉੱਤੇ।
ਘਰ ਇੱਕ ਐਸੀ ਥਾਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਹਰ ਕੋਈ ਆਪਣੀ ਨਿੱਜੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦੇ ਸੁਨਹਿਰੀ ਪਲ ਯਾਦ ਰੱਖਦਾ ਹੈ। ਉਹ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਉਹ ਰਹਿੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰਿਆ ਜੀਵਨ ਬਤੀਤ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਪੂਰੀਆਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਜਦ ਕਿਸੇ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਨੂੰ ਸਜੇ ਹੋਏ ਘਰ 'ਚ ਬਦਲਿਆ ਜਾਵੇ। ਨਵੇਂ ਘਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਫਰੇਮਿੰਗ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਫਿਨਿਸ਼ਿੰਗ ਤੱਕ, ਡ੍ਰੇਪਰੀ, ਪੇਂਟਿੰਗਸ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਡੈਕੋਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਐਕਸੈਸਰੀਜ਼ ਤੱਕ, ਤੁਸੀਂ SK ਹੋਮ ਡਿਜ਼ਾਈਨਸ ਦੀਆਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਸਰਵਿਸਿਜ਼ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਸੁਪਨਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਘਰ ਨੂੰ ਹਕੀਕਤ 'ਚ ਬਦਲ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ। ਕੰਟੈਕਟ ਕਰੋ ਸੰਦੀਪ ਕੌਰ 6048259295।
Once again, welcome back to the program. Today is a special program because in the first part of the program, I had talked to Mark Burchell and Terry Kelly, who talked about the importance of Remembrance Day and how in Canada we celebrate this day and we pay homage to our veterans. In this particular program, we are talking to Steve Purewal, who is a well-known person in the community, and he has highlighted the achievements of the Sikh soldiers and the South Asian soldiers as to what their contributions is and why we ought to know what they have done. Through exhibitions, through a book, and now he's coming up with a film also in which he'll be highlighting the valor, the sacrifice of these soldiers. We'll get him shortly on air, but before that, some of our sponsors with whose support every day you watch this program from 7 p.m. onwards, Pacific Standard Time. This program has been brought to you with the support of Agnihotri Immigration Consulting Limited. ਜੇਕਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਟੈਂਪਰੇਰੀ ਸਟੇਟਸ ਪਰਮਨੈਂਟ ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਸ ਨਵੇਂ ਹੋ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਵਿੱਚ, ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟਸ, ਸਿਟੀਜ਼ਨਸ਼ਿਪ ਹਾਇਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ ਫੋਰਨ ਵਰਕਰਸ ਨੂੰ, ਐਕਸਪ੍ਰੈਸ ਐਂਟਰੀ ਸਪਾਂਸਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ, ਗ੍ਰੈਂਡ ਪੇਰੈਂਟਸ ਨੂੰ, ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਇਲੈਕਟ੍ਰੋਨਿਕ ਟਰੈਵਲ ਆਥੋਰਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨ ਬਾਰੇ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਲੈਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ ਤਾਂ ਫਿਰ 2006 ਤੋਂ ਨੀਰਾ ਅਗਨੀਹੋਤਰੀ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਔਨੈਸਟ ਅਤੇ ਰਿਲਾਇਬਲ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਅਤੇ ਸਰਵਿਸਿਜ਼ ਪ੍ਰੋਵਾਈਡ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਕਾਲ ਕਰੋ 6045972284 604-597-2284. She's a certified immigration consultant and you will be in safe hands. The program has been brought to you with the support of AMC Insurance. If you're looking for home, auto, travel, business, life or recreational insurance, they have 9 branches in the lower mainland to serve you and they're open 7 days a week from 8:30 a.m. onwards till 9 p.m. Call 604-507-6666. Our next sponsor is Ahi Transportation Group. They have been in the transportation and storage industry since 1993. And their motto is your cargo is our responsibility. So if you are planning to send any of your goods anywhere in Canada, you can depend upon them. Phone number is 604-940-9511. 604-940-9511, 8970 River Road, Delta, another office. Let's get back Steve Purewal and continue with our discussion. So Steve, before the break, you have talked about the valor, the sacrifices. What are the statistics? How many soldiers fought for the British Indian Army in these wars?
Well, the relationship between the Sikhs and the Punjabis with the British started with the annexation of Punjab into the British Empire after the Anglo-Sikh Wars in 1849. Really, after 1857, after the mutiny in India, and I call it the mutiny rather than the War of Independence because we have to remember it was very isolated. It was not a rebellion across India. It was a few regiments in Bihar and so forth, and even other British Indian regiments did not join in it. So I think it's a misnomer to actually call it the War of Independence. But in that mutiny, the Sikhs aligned themselves with the British to fight the Purviyas, the Easterners, because they had a score to settle with the Easterners. Because initially in 1846 they had attacked Punjab was a sovereign nation and was not a part of British India, and these troops from the east, from Bihar and Bengal, had attacked Punjab and undermined its sovereign status. So there was a score to settle with them, and so the Sikhs aligned themselves with the British so that they could settle that score. Now, as a result of that, the British decided to favor seeking recruitment into the British Indian Army because they felt that they were more reliable and more trustworthy, because now the other forces, the Hindus and Muslims from the Bengal presidency, had rebelled. So from 1857 onwards, we see a trajectory that by the 1880s has 1/3 of the British Indian Army being recruited from Punjab. And then on the eve of the war in 1914, the First World War, half of the whole of the British Indian Army was Punjabi. And remember, Punjab had only been a part of India 50 years at that point in time, and all the other provinces had been a part of British India for much, much longer. The Punjab was the last province really to fall to the British. So in that time span, then the numbers increase. So from 50,000 to 200,000 and so forth. So the numbers are phenomenal in terms of, by the First World War, of the 1 million combatants the British Indian Army sent to fight, in the First World War, 500,000 of them were Punjabis. In my book, Duty, Honor and Izzat, I break down by province, within the province, district, even to Tehsil, where those troops come from. What you'll see then is that the pattern of recruitment of what were called the martial races, the British favoured the tribes from the north, whether they were the Gurkhas, whether they were the Sikhs or the Pashtuns, and the Punjabi Musliman. The British favoured them as they termed them the martial classes, and giving them more rights and privileges than any other community in India. And that those privileges resulted in land grants, better pay, pensions, and so forth. So it became a virtuous cycle that the recruitment of one generation led to the recruitment of the next generation, as they kept the units, regiments recruited locally within villages and so forth. So there was a perpetual stream of recruits into the British Indian Army from Punjab, and specifically from the Doaba area, given the land shortage of in that region. Many people would consider joining the army and traveling the world, and hence the diaspora, the immigration patterns coming out of Punjab were closely linked to where the British Empire flew the British flag, and that's how we ended up with a diaspora in Canada. There was basically the military bringing these people out to the rest of the world. So the numbers increased throughout the British Empire's tenure, firstly in terms of the army, and then also the recruitment extended to paramilitary forces in the Far East and policing forces in the Far East. And of course, we know that when we try to do that here, enlist in police forcing and in policing in Canada, we were not allowed because there was a white Canada policy at that time.
Great. As this program is going live, I'm also receiving a lot of questions from the people. So one question is from Inder Singh from Australia, and he asks that what was the major reason for so many soldiers jumping into this bandwagon? Was it because of their loyalty, or was it the necessity for some kind of service which they were getting?
Well, it's multiple factors. There's never one single answer for something like this. It's down to people's economic circumstances, their heritage. They may belong to a Rajput class that believes military service is, a tradition, a heritage. They may belong to an agrarian class like the Jats, who may not have, if they have multiple sons in the family, may have enlisted, the second son or the third son in the military. So there's multiple reasons. But we have to remember that in 1849, when this recruitment commenced, and 1846, when the British first set up the Firozpur Brigade and the Ludhiana Brigade, that the Punjabis were disillusioned with their own management. And that was the sole reason for the collapse of the Punjabi sovereign kingdom of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, was its own mismanagement and treachery. And so the armed common man did not really have a high opinion. And in fact, the numbers now that the Sikh kingdom was disbanded, the number of Sikhs actually started to drop, and we see the recruitment of Punjabis into the British Army then being predicated on them wearing the 5Ks, actually increasing the numbers of the Sikh headcount again. So it was actually a place, the British Army actually afforded all the rights to Sikhs in Punjab, gave them extra privileges. So for some people, that identity was the draw. The British respected the Sikh soldier as the beau ideal of all soldiers, i.e., they were ferocious in battle, but they were humane, after the battles. So there was that. There was a lot of respect given. A lot of prestige was attached with being a part of the largest military establishment on the planet. But equally, there were people that were impoverished and perhaps didn't have very arable land, and it was the only employment that they could take up. So very multiple reasons. But the taking up of arms on the northwest frontier was something that was close to everyone, given that the Punjab is such a thoroughfare for invasions over the millennia, and the British understood that, and they wanted that sword arm to be a part of the British Empire.
Great, thank you very much for this question, and Mr. Inder Singh, and thanks for this answer, Steve. Again, it's time for a short break. We'll go for a break, and once we are back, this short film that you are making, this is making headlines, promises. What is this film, and what are you trying to highlight in this? We'll learn from you after this short break. So let's go for a break, and we'll be shortly back.
ਜੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸਮੈਨ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਪਿਆਰ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈ ਤਾਂ ਕੀ ਵਜ੍ਹਾ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ? ਸੁਖੀ ਬਾਟ ਮੋਟਰਸ ਦੇ ਓਨਰ ਸੁਖੀ ਬਾਟ ਨੂੰ ਵੇਖ ਕੇ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਸਮਝ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ। ਇੰਟੈਲੀਜੈਂਸ ਦਾ ਉਦਾਹਰਨ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਕਾਰ ਸੈਗਮੈਂਟ ਤੋਂ ਵੱਖ ਸੁਖੀ ਬਾਟ ਮੋਟਰਸ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਨੇ ਸਰੀ ਦਾ ਪਹਿਲਾ ਟਰੱਕ ਸੈਂਟਰ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲੋੜ ਦੇ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੋੜੀਂਦੇ ਟਰੱਕਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਗਾਈਡੈਂਸ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਹੈ। ਸਪੇਸ ਮੋਡੀਫਿਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੇ ਫਿਊਲ ਐਫੀਸ਼ੀਐਂਸੀ ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਧਿਆਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ। ਸੁਖੀ ਬਾਟ ਟਰੱਕ ਸੈਂਟਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਟਰੱਕਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਹੈ ਟੌਰ।
ਸ਼ਾਈਨ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਡੈਂਟਲ ਕਲੀਨਿਕ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਸਤਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀ ਦੇਖ-ਰੇਖ ਹੇਠ ਆਧੁਨਿਕ ਮਸ਼ੀਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਵਰਤੋਂ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਦੰਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਹੀ ਕੇਅਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਨ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾਵਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਦੰਦਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਾਫ਼ ਕਰਨਾ, ਕਰਾਊਨਸ, ਬ੍ਰਿਜਸ, ਡੈਂਟਲ ਇੰਪਲਾਂਟਸ, ਰੂਟ ਕਨਾਲ, ਡੈਂਚਰਸ, ਬੌਂਡਿੰਗ ਅਤੇ ਵਨੀਰਸ, ਐਕਸਟ੍ਰੈਕਸ਼ਨਸ, ਬੋਨ ਗ੍ਰੈਫਟਿੰਗ ਆਦਿ ਸ਼ਾਮਲ ਹਨ। ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਡੈਂਟਿਸਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਮਾਹਰ ਹਨ। ਇਹ ਇੰਸ਼ੋਰੈਂਸ ਕੰਪਨੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਡਾਇਰੈਕਟਲੀ ਬਿੱਲ ਭੇਜਦੇ ਹਨ ਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਘੱਟ ਤੋਂ ਘੱਟ ਚਾਰਜ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਵਾਅਦਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਨ। ਫॉर ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਸ਼ਾਈਨ ਐਂਡ ਸਮਾਈਲ 604 503 03 20 ਤੇ ਕਾਲ ਕਰੋ। ਕਿੰਗ ਜਾਰਜ ਸੁਪਰ ਸਟੋਰ ਦੇ ਕੋਲ, ਯੂਨਿਟ 370 7488 ਕਿੰਗ ਜਾਰਜ ਬੁਲੇਵਾਰਡ, ਸਰੀ। ਦਰਦ ਤੋਂ ਆਰਾਮ ਐਲੋਪੈਥਿਕ ਦਵਾਈਆਂ ਖਾਣ ਨਾਲ ਆ ਤਾਂ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਸਾਈਡ ਇਫੈਕਟਸ ਵੀ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਨ। ਨੈਚੁਰਲ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਸਪਲੀਮੈਂਟਸ ਨਾਲ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਦਰਦ ਨੂੰ ਜੜੋਂ ਖਤਮ ਕਰਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਾਰਕਸ ਫਾਰਮੇਸੀ ਦੇ ਹਿੰਦੀ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਬੋਲਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਟਾਫ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਮਦਦ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਨ। ਇਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਡਕਟਸ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਹਰ ਹਿੱਸੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਭੇਜਦੇ ਹਨ। ਅਪਾਇੰਟਮੈਂਟ ਬੁੱਕ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਅੱਜ ਹੀ ਕਾਲ ਕਰੋ 604 596 1774 ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਵਿਜ਼ਿਟ ਕਰੋ 8035 120 ਸਟਰੀਟ ਡੈਲਟਾ। ਦਰਦ ਨੂੰ ਜੜੋਂ ਖਤਮ ਕਰੋ।
Finally, ride-hailing is here. Fast, convenient, Lucky to Go is British Columbia's first ride-hailing app that integrates licensed drivers in one place, so your next ride is always right around the corner. Need to get to a big meeting or hit the gym? Maybe a celebratory drink after closing a big deal? Why wait? Spend your time enjoying your time. Lucky to Go. Wherever you need to be, we're here.
ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜੀ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰ ਫਿਰ ਆਪ ਸਭ ਦਾ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਵਿੱਚ। ਪ੍ਰੋਮਿਸਸ, ਇਹ ਨਵੀਂ ਸ਼ਾਰਟ ਫਿਲਮ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ 20 ਮਿੰਟਾਂ ਦੀ ਇਹ ਫਿਲਮ ਹੈ, ਇਹ ਬਣਾਈ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਸਟੀਵ ਪੁਰੇਵਾਲ ਵੱਲੋਂ, ਜਿਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਹਾਈਲਾਈਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਸਿੱਖ ਫੌਜੀਆਂ ਦੀ ਬਹਾਦਰੀ, ਸਾਊਥ ਏਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਫੌਜੀਆਂ ਦੀ ਬਹਾਦਰੀ ਨੂੰ। ਹਰ ਸਾਲ 11 ਨਵੰਬਰ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਮੈਮੋਰੇਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਫਸਟ ਵਰਲਡ ਵਾਰ ਦੀ ਐਂਡਿੰਗ, ਜਿਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਹਜ਼ਾਰਾਂ ਹੀ ਸੋਲਜਰਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਨ ਉਹ ਮਾਰੇ ਗਏ। ਇਸ ਸਾਲ ਵੀ ਇਨਕਰੇਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ 1,30,000 ਸਿੱਖ ਫੌਜੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਵੋਲੰਟੀਅਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਆਰਮਡ ਫੋਰਸਿਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਫਾਈਟ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ, ਉਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ 74,000 ਤੋਂ ਵੱਧ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਨ ਇਸ 4 ਸਾਲ ਦੇ ਕੌਨਫਲਿਕਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਮਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਗਏ ਸੀ। ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਬਹਾਦਰੀ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਫਲੈਂਡਰਸ ਬੈਲਜੀਅਮ ਵਿੱਚ, ਸੌਮ ਫਰਾਂਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਏ, ਗੈਲੀਪੋਲੀ ਟਰਕੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਏ, ਜਾਂ ਈਸਟ ਅਫਰੀਕਾ, ਪੈਲਸਤੀਨ ਜਾਂ ਇਜਿਪਟ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋਵੇ, ਇਹ ਬਹਾਦਰੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਬੜੀ ਦਲੇਰੀ ਨਾਲ ਜਰਮਨਸ ਅਤੇ ਟਰਕਸ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹ ਬੈਟਲਸ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਅਤੇ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਾਮਯਾਬੀ ਜੋ ਹੈ ਮਿਲੀ ਅਤੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਬਟਾਲੀਅਨਸ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸਨ ਉਹ ਗੁਰੂ ਗ੍ਰੰਥ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਜੀ ਦਾ ਸਰੂਪ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਾਇਆ ਕਰਦੀਆਂ ਸਨ ਅਤੇ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇੱਕ ਟੈਂਪਰਰੀ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬਣਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ। ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਹਾਈਲਾਈਟ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡੇ ਅੱਜ ਮਹਿਮਾਨ ਸਟੀਵ ਪੁਰੇਵਾਲ ਸੋ ਆਓ ਇਹ ਜੋ ਫਿਲਮ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਣਾਈ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਟੀਵ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਦਾ ਸਿਲਸਿਲਾ ਅੱਗੇ ਤੋਰ ਕੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਸ਼ਾਮਿਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਸਵਾਲ ਹੋਏ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸੰਪਰਕ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ। So Steve, this is a beautiful film that you are coming up with, Promises. So how did you get this name in your mind that Promises is the name of the film that you are giving?
Well, I think the plot, it will all become apparent. I don't want to give the plot away. But anytime a soldier enlists, takes an oath, he makes a promise. And I think society gives an implicit promise to a soldier that they will be honored and his service recognized and valued. And I think what's happened here, my feeling is that for our community, the promises have been broken, whether it was the Indian state becoming a republic. The soldiers were never given their dues for fighting bravely against fascism across the world in the Second World War. In fact, they were called Ghulam and were insulted in that way and dishonored to the point that the history of those regiments that had defeated Hitler and defeated the Japanese were considered repugnant. So there's a promise broken there. And in the West, for whom these soldiers were fighting, they were fighting for the British crown, for the British Empire. And remember, Canada and India, prior to 1947, are all British. So even in Canada, there was no such thing as Canadian citizenship. It wasn't enacted until 1946. So in 1945, 1944, where this battle scene is set in Promises, the Canadians and the Indian soldiers are both British soldiers, and they're fighting for the same king. They're fighting under the same flag. The maple leaf flag doesn't exist until the middle of the 60s. So, there's a promise that by standing by your brother in the battlefield, your brother is going to remember you and thank you for it, for having his back. And that was never done. They were forgotten and never included in our textbooks. There's not a statue anywhere in the country to say thank you for your friendship. And so I think many promises have been broken, and that's why I focused on that theme and given the film that title.
So by when this will be out? Right now you have just filmed it, so when are you expecting it to release it?
Well, we've just finished filming the battle scenes. We were in Kelowna and we finished in Langley. We do have the contemporary scenes to film, and we're hoping that by March, COVID conditions permitting, it will be complete, and hopefully we will be airing it coming in Sikh Heritage Month 2021.
Great. Okay, from the research that you have done, what was so special about these soldiers that fascinated you, and as well their valor and chivalry is really commendable. So what did you find special in these soldiers?
So one of the things we have to remember is that the army recruited very young, and even within the Canadian and British forces, there were many soldiers that were in their teens and early 20s. And what strikes me is that they were ready to do their duty. There's nothing more impressive to my mind than to be able to take an oath and to execute and to follow through on that oath to the point that you would risk your life on the front line, and your courage, your sense of honor wouldn't permit you to break your oath. In simplistic terms, that's the epitome of honor in my mind. Yet the same type of age group in Canada and on the West Coast specifically, whether they're teenagers, early 20s, are doing the exact opposite. They're adopting dishonorable ways of living, entering into criminality and so forth. And there's such a drastic difference between the generations that came before and the generations now, where honor is nothing. It's dismissed. And if there's honor amongst criminals, I think that's a misnomer. People say that you find belonging in gangs and so forth, but the first moment you will find treachery within the gang. So that is not an honorable institution, not like the army. So there's parallels we need to understand, between youth enlisting and serving in uniform, and youth enlisting into gangs and criminal activity. And I think that's what makes this such a contemporary subject. We need to work our way around this.
Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. Well, you have rightly mentioned that due recognition that needed to be given has not been given, but thanks to your efforts and many other some people who are bringing these issues forward, towards the end, how can the community play their part in spreading this message? While you are doing your part, what would you like from the community at such?
Well, I think what we have to understand is if last year we all heard Don Cherry call out immigrants for not being patriotic, one of the things, whether you're a new immigrant, you've been here for 5 years, or you've been here for 5 generations, I feel it's an insult for a martial community to be denigrated in that way, that they don't honor soldiers, don't honor military service. Now, if the community was a completely pacifist community, had no martial traditions, then maybe that's tolerable. But the very fact that people in Canadian society don't equate military service and honor and the prestige that goes with it. And I talk about prestige because in every hamlet in England, there's tributes, statues to soldiers. In every town in Canada, there's a cenotaph to soldiers. There are holidays attributed to soldiers, like Today Remembrance. Our Parliament building is draped in poppies right now. That's all prestige. That's all honoring, and that's all respecting the soldier. And for a community that is, whose DNA is martial, I think that's the ultimate insult, to be called unpatriotic, as if not willing to pick up arms. And the Sikhs, whichever country they are in, are traditionally very patriotic and are willing to serve. And so if the community does not want to be denigrated in that way, insulted in that way, then it's up to the community to learn about their military heritage and value it and discuss it amongst themselves, instead of throwing soldiers under the bus and calling them traitors and treacherous because of politics. And that's where we need to start, because once we value our own history, then other people will value it too.
Very true, very rightly said. There are a lot of questions, but time does not permit. But I would request you that there are so many questions which people want to ask, and Dr. Rishi Singh is congratulating you, Steve, for the wonderful work that you are doing, and he also has a question. So briefly, if you could just answer this. He asks that, was there not any association of Sikhs under the Patiala rule, broadly Satluj states, with the British Army before annexation of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Sarkar-e-Khalsa in 1849?
Yes, so if you think about it, in 1846, the first Anglo-Sikh wars, what they did was the defeat of the Punjab added the Doaba region into what was the CIS, Satluj states. So prior to 1846, the Patiala, there was an allegiance between the Patiala region with the British. In fact, the British had signed a treaty in 1809 that the border between Punjab proper and the rest of India would be the Satluj, and that border was breached in 1846. So there was a relationship between those states prior to 1846. It was in place to the point that the Sikhs within those communities considered Maharaja Ranjit Singh a competitor, and therefore they had aligned themselves with the British.
Great, thank you very much, Steve, for sharing your valuable thoughts on this particular day, and especially how you're highlighting it in the form of a new film. So congratulations and best wishes, and thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me on the show, Harpreet.
Thank you. ਸੋ ਅੱਜ ਜੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਟੀਵ ਪੁਰੇਵਾਲ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਫੌਜੀਆਂ ਦੀ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਕਿ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡੀ ਕੰਟਰੀਬਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਹੈਗੀ ਏ। ਉਹ ਫੌਜੀ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਦੇਸ਼ ਛੱਡ ਕੇ ਬਾਹਰਲੇ ਮੁਲਕਾਂ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਆਰਮੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ। ਲੋਇਲਟੀ, ਇੱਜ਼ਤ, ਆਨਰ, ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਦਿਖਾਈਆਂ। ਅਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਅਸੀਂ 11 ਨਵੰਬਰ ਵਾਲੇ ਦਿਨ ਯਾਦ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਫੌਜੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ, ਉਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡਾ ਫਰਜ਼ ਬਣਦਾ, ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਸਟੀਵ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਆਪਣਾ ਯੋਗਦਾਨ ਪਾ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ ਥਰੂ seminars, through exhibitions, through books, ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਫਿਲਮ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਏ ਨੇ। ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਸਿਰਫ ਆਪਣੇ ਫੌਜੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕੋ ਹੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਯਾਦ ਰੱਖੀਏ, ਬਲਕਿ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪੈਟਰੀਓਟਿਜ਼ਮ ਹੈ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਵੈਲਰ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸੈਕਰੀਫਾਈਸ ਜੋ ਹੈ, ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਸਲਾਮ ਕਰੀਏ। ਇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਓ ਸਾਰੇ ਰਲ ਮਿਲ ਕੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਇਹ ਭੁੱਲੇ ਹੋਏ ਸਾਡੇ ਫੌਜੀ ਨੇ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਭਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੈਸਟਰਨ ਹੈਮਿਸਫੇਅਰ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਦੇਸ਼ ਮੁਲਕ ਭਾਰਤ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਗੇ ਲਿਆਉਣ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਣਾ ਯੋਗਦਾਨ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਪਾਈਏ। ਥੋੜਾ ਮੇਰਾ ਸਾਥ ਹੋਇਆ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈ ਮੰਡੇ ਟੂ ਫਰਾਈਡੇ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਦੇ 7 ਵਜੇ ਪੈਸੀਫਿਕ ਸਟੈਂਡਰਡ ਟਾਈਮ ਦੇ ਮੁਤਾਬਿਕ, ਜਿਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਹਰ ਰੋਜ਼ ਮੰਡੇ ਟੂ ਫਰਾਈਡੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਮੁੱਦਿਆਂ ਉੱਤੇ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦਾ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਬਣਨਾ ਚਾਹੋ ਤਾਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਸੰਪਰਕ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ 6046037555, or you can email me at harpreetsingshow@gmail.com. And also we would seek your support. If you are liking these programs, please go to youtube.com/harpreetsingshow and subscribe to the show so that we can further spread this message all over. Thank you very much for sparing your time. Is the Nali program di karna samapti, fir mulaqat karange. Have a safe evening, stay safe and enjoy yourself and stay healthy.
Karen thought she won a gift card, but we had a much bigger surprise for her. We rise by lifting others. Basant Motors.